Anyway, I think there's so many things that our federal government, our national government, and our Washington, D.C. government is doing that we never gave it permission to do. We never authorized these things in the Constitution. You know, there was a time when in America, people would say, you know, if you went to your congressman and said, hey, I got this problem, or our community's got this problem, or our state's got this problem, would the federal government help us with this? A congressman would take out the Constitution and say, I need to check my rule book. I need to find out if that's within my jurisdiction. Is this something I'm allowed to do? I served in the state legislature in Texas a long time ago, 25 years ago, and I did the same thing as a state rep. Somebody bring a bill or an idea to me, and I said, okay, hang on. I got to make sure that what you're wanting me to get involved in is within my jurisdiction. Because it might be something that only individuals should deal with, or families, or churches, or maybe it's a local government thing, or maybe it's actually a federal government thing. I got no right as a state rep to declare war on another nation or to negotiate a treaty with another nation. That's definitely something the federal government should do. Well, congressmen used to ask that same question, which is why when we had, pandemic of alcoholism in the country, and people wanted to, make alcohol illegal, went to the congressman and said, hey, we want to ban alcohol. The congressman said, we can't pass a law to ban alcohol. We have to do a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol because we're limited to 17 things in the Constitution. That's it. And if you want to add an 18th thing, the only way to properly do that is through the Constitution. So give us an amendment, which they did, passed the 18th Amendment, added that power to the federal government. They were able to ban alcohol. Didn't work out so well. Didn't take long before we said, you know what, we really don't like you having that power. Let's take that away. So fortunately, you can go back and do another constitutional amendment. 21st Amendment takes that power away. We said we're not going to do that anymore. So that's the proper way to expand government's power, is to actually go to the rule book and say, we're going to give you a power, or we're going to take a power away. Unfortunately, in our country, the Constitution itself has not been the guide for how to determine the jurisdiction of the federal government for about 90 years. Our Supreme Court used to protect the Constitution. It used to actually say, you know what, if it's not here, you don't get to do it. And then all of a sudden we had the switch in time to save 9. I don't know if y'all studied that in school yet. That was basically the Supreme Court, who had been saying no to FDR's essentially expansion of the government to solve everybody's problem, which worked out really great. But they'd been saying no, and then he did the threat to, expand the court, pack the court, and so you had to switch in time to say 9, which means the guys on the court switched their votes, and they decided all those things we told you the feds couldn't do because it's not in the Constitution, like minimum wage, absolutely unconstitutional for the federal government to do that, and all these departments they wanted to create. All of a sudden they changed their mind and said, oh, well, wait a minute, we looked at it a little bit different, and now we're going to let you do that. As if the Supreme Court has the power to expand the federal government's jurisdiction under the Constitution. They don't. But they did it. And for 90 years, they basically said yes to everything the federal government wanted to do. And so then we ended up with that as our Constitution. So this is now not the Constitution, this is the Courtstitution. And that's what we live under right now. We don't live under a Constitution. We live under the Courtstitution. There's not one of us in this room that can tell you every line that's in this thing. It's become an absolute disaster, a total mess. And it's because we didn't do our job. We, the people, allowed them to continue to do that for 90 years. What should have happened was 90 years ago, when all that happened, the states should have stood up and said, no, we are going to pass constitutional amendments overruling you, federal government, and you get no say whatsoever in the process. They should have done that a long time ago. We did that at the beginning of the country. Didn't like a Supreme Court decision? Hey, we'll amend the Constitution to overrule that Supreme Court decision. That was the 11th Amendment. Actually had the founding fathers in Congress at the time when they did that. So had we done that for the last 90 years, this wouldn't even be a big deal what we're talking about tonight. In fact, you might not even show up tonight because the federal government would still be in its box only doing the 17 things it's supposed to do, and we'd probably be having a fight about something at the state level or the local level, which is perfectly fine. We could be having that discussion. But right now, we've got 90 years of disastrous government expansion at the federal level that has got to be reversed. We're $37 trillion in debt. We're stealing from these young people right here. We've already stolen your future, not only yours, but your kids. There's no way to pay off that level of debt in our generation. The founders said that was immoral.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys know this. It's really a little terrifying. Any of you guys have jobs? Yeah, high school students, right?
I had a job once.
Yeah,
a long time ago.
No, this is not a job. How long would it take you in your current job to pay off $111,000? Long time?
While still paying your bills, right?
By the way, that's how much you owe right now. Probably more than that. That was the last time I looked. But each person in the United States right now, each citizen, owes about $111,000 to the federal government. In other words, that's the debt of the federal government. If it's the federal government's debt, it's our debt. It's unbelievably outrageous. So I think what we're trying to say, what we would agree on, I think most of the people in this room would agree on is that government has grown out of control. Raise your hand if you think government's grown out of control in America. Look, what we know for sure about American history is that every single administration since Washington, with the exception of Calvin Coolidge, has grown the size and scope of the federal government. Every single one.
Even the current one.
Even the current one. Look, a lot of people, including me, love Ronald Reagan. He was a good conservative president. It grew under Ronald Reagan. He talked about cutting the size and scope of the federal government. The federal government was too far out of hand. He couldn't get it done. It was too much of a beast. Donald Trump is growing the size and scope of the federal government. I love Donald Trump. I think he's a fantastic president. That's my opinion. I don't think he's great on debt. Like, he's a real estate developer. They live on debt. And so we're getting deeper and deeper in debt. Despite the fact that I love most of his policies, I'm worried about the fiscal future of this country. We're in big trouble fiscally. And so if we know that forever, literally, in the history of the country, administrations have grown the size and scope of government, and if we think that's a bad thing, what do we do about that?
Right, because we all agree on the problem.
Right.
We all agree federal government's out of control. Government is micromanaging our lives. The federal government's telling you how much water's got to flow through your toilet, what kind of light bulbs you can have. You guys end up doing school loans, or you build a house, you do any of that stuff, the federal government is micromanaging all that. We all agree that's nuts. They don't know what is going on in our lives in Wyoming or back home for me in Texas. So we all agree they're outside the box. The question is, how do we get them back in the box?
So here's what a lot of people will say. A lot of people say, well, Mark, what we need to do is just send better people to Washington, D.C. You know, we've got to elect the best people we can, and they're going to fix this mess in Washington, D.C. How's that working out for us? It's not working for us. It's never worked for us. And if I look at it, you know, when I got introduced, Julie mentioned this Tea Party movement. A lot of you young people won't know what that is. It was a political movement back in early 2010, and we caused the biggest swing between parties in Congress since 1938. 62 seats flipped from Democrat to Republican. That's unbelievable, like just historical. And I was there, and my thought was, okay, it's done. Like, they're going to get it. Everything's going to change.
Mission accomplished.
Right, mission accomplished. And the big thing we were talking about, by the way, was the debt and fiscal responsibility. That was the main thing. And then nothing changed. Okay, so if that didn't work, then what do we do? And that was kind of my question after that. Like, I don't know what to do. I helped lead this thing. It's everything. This is what I learned in my civics class, was you support the people who believe in what you believe, you elect them, you help them get elected, and then they go to Washington and they do the things they're supposed to do. When that doesn't work, the question is, what do we do? And why did that happen in the first place?
Because they were good people, a lot of good people.
Absolutely.
A lot of our friends.
So the reason it happened, I would say, is because it's not a personnel problem. We don't have a problem with the people in Washington, D.C. That's not a popular opinion, by the way. I understand people are going to be like, oh, they're all terrible in D.C. The reality is, they're just human beings in D.C. You can go all the way back to the founding period. There were terrible people in the government during the founding period.
Because there were humans.
Yeah, amazing how that works, isn't it? Human nature is the same as it was back then. And so that's not the problem. The problem is that we have broken the structure of our system of governance. If you have a bad structure and you put good people in a bad structure, you will always get a bad result. I can do a sports analogy for you. If you're a football fan and you got a coach and he's got a bad system and he's got great players, but he's got a system that doesn't work, and he teaches all these young people how to play football according to a system that's not a winning system, it's not a successful system. You can have the best players in the world and they're going to lose football games. So bad system, bad result. We had a great system. We had, honestly, the best system in the history of the world for governance, for freedom, and then we broke that system. We've especially broken it.
Actually, Madison said it was the worst system other than every other one.
And I think that's true. His governing systems are all flawed. But we had a system that had these incredible checks and balances, all kinds of ways to make sure that you balance greed against greed and ambition against ambition, and then we broke that system. There's a whole bunch of ways. I won't get into all the details. Mostly the courts broke it. By the way, this big fat Constitution Rick held up, that's every Supreme Court case ever issued since the beginning of the Supreme Court. It's over 3,000 pages. It weighs over 12 pounds. That's an old edition. I think this one's 2002. So it weighs a lot more than that.
Yeah, we got that room in that. We got a whole lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. So this is now this. So.
Hey, don't leave the checks and balances thing. Like, what do you mean by that? What do you,
So if you, I mean, you guys probably learned about this in your class, checks and balances, you got the House and Senate, the legislative branch is checked by the executive branch, which is checked by the judicial branch, and all the branches are checking each other back.
because we don't trust anybody,
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't, because.
The heart of man is evil, no man can know it.
So if you know your Bible, that's in the Bible, right? And so we know that there's gonna be all these bad things that people are gonna do if they have unchecked power. So if the branches check against each other, the one we don't talk about as much is that we should also have the states checking the federal government. And I would argue even the local government, municipalities, counties, checking the state government. And actually, me and Rick checking each other. Like literally, we should keep an eye on our fellow citizens and make sure we're all staying on the right path.
Iron sharpening iron.
That's the way the system is intended to work. Well, we've broken those checks and balances. We took some of them away. I'll give you a very specific example. This is one that I didn't know. I'm a lawyer. I didn't even realize this after law school. 17th Amendment. 17th Amendment was the amendment that said, now we're going to directly elect our senators. What I mean by that is you vote if you're of voting age. You vote for your U.S. senator. Well, the way the framers set it up was that the U.S. senator was appointed by your state legislature. Why? Well, because you already had representation in the Congress through the United States House.
Yeah, think about you got the House and the Senate, right? So you got both bodies that make up the Congress, and the House was for all of us to have direct access to what's happening in Washington, D.C. But the Senate was so that the states had representation, and those senators knew, man, I better not create the Department of Education, because those folks back home in the state legislature, they've already got a state Department of Education. They don't want me duplicating and telling them what to do.
Yeah, I would say the original senators had the easiest job in the history of the country. Their job was to go to Washington, D.C. They only needed to know one word: no. Like the federal government, like, oh, we're going to set up a Department of Energy. Nope, that's ours. Oh, we're going to regulate your land back home in Wyoming. Nope, we do that at home in Wyoming. Their job was to prevent the infringement on states' rights by the federal government. And at some point in American history, 1913, you guys might want to look this up, I think it's the worst year in American political history. We get the income tax, the 16th Amendment. You get the 17th Amendment, which is the direct election of senators. You get the creation of the Federal Reserve. We could do an entire night on the Federal Reserve. It's a big problem. And you get the Reapportionment Act in 1913. How many members are there in the House of Representatives? 435. 435, right.
Impressive. We have a cookie at the back. Whoever that was.
Why 435?
Based on the population.
What's that?
They were growing too big, and they had to limit the amount of people in the room.
They said, you know what? There's enough of this. Like, we're done. We had too many. We don't want any more. It's a weird number.
Because the Constitution doesn't say that.
Right.
There's actually an act of Congress that decided, and the Constitution did give Congress the power to do that.
Right. So Congress just decided, okay, 435 is enough. By the way, if you use the original formula for representation in the United States of America, every 10 years, it's not the census, what did you call it? The enumeration. Every 10 years, they would enumerate the citizens in the country, the number of citizens in the country, and they would add representatives according to the original formula. Today, that would be over 7,000 members in the House of Representatives. Some people would say, man, it's 7,000 people, you couldn't get anything done.
Good. Yeah,
Seems good, right? Like, I don't have a problem with that. I think that would be okay.
Okay, fun trivia for the students that are here. There was actually an amendment in the Bill of Rights, the first amendment listed in the Bill of Rights. There were 12 amendments actually sent to the states, and it was to do that right there, to actually put that in the Constitution, so they wouldn't have been able to do the 435. And the second one in the list of 12 later got ratified. It's now the 27th Amendment in the Constitution. But we always think of the Bill of Rights as 10 amendments because there were 10 amendments that actually got ratified, but 12 were proposed. But the first one was this issue that Mark's talking about. And by the way, that 1913 thing, go look at the growth of the federal government. It's like this, it's growing a little bit, 1913, boom, hockey stick curve. Why? Because you no longer had the Senate telling Congress, no, you can't do these things. And then you create all these other problems. Go ahead.
So we break the system of checks and balances in our system of government, so now what do you do about it? Because sending people to Washington, D.C. isn't working. And I think some people would say, I get this all the time, Mark, oh, you don't need to do what you're doing with this convention of states thing. We just need to pray. And my answer is, hallelujah, yes, more every single day. And we pray a lot in our organization, among ourselves, at the table every day. That's not fixing our problems. We should pray, and we should pray more And we, by the way, I think that's the fundamental thing in the country, according to me, is we need to pray for God's favor on this country for our salvation. I don't think we necessarily deserve it, but we should pray for it because God is more merciful than any amount of sin we could commit. And we're going to need that if we're going to save the country.
One quick quote on prayer. John Hancock, President of the Continental Congress, pivotal player in the Revolution. He said, I urge you by all that is honorable, by all that is sacred, not only to pray, but to act.
So what do we do to act? So if it's not just prayer, if sending people to Washington, D.C. isn't enough, like just electing good people, what do? I think we have an obligation to do something. I started with that. I have a personal obligation, I feel. I think all of us have an obligation to do something. We have an obligation to the men and the women and the families that gave everything all throughout the history of this country. Before the American Revolution, all the way through it, and through the wars we faced, beaches in Normandy, everything. There are people who gave their lives so that we could be in this room tonight, and I think that puts a great obligation upon us. So if it's not elections, if it's not just prayer, then what do?
Well, I thought, wait a minute, I thought Fed, Trump state, supremacy clause, all that good stuff. I mean, what could the states possibly do to overrule the federal government?
Well, September 15th, I think, is the most important date in American history. And I don't know.
Oh, wait, tell them the real reason. Don't give them some constitutional reason.
Because that's my wife's
That's
birthday.
what I thought. Yeah.
I get in a lot of trouble if I forget that, so I try to work it in the speeches every time. It reminds me. September 15, 1787, the men are gathered in convention. It's 2 days before the end of convention. You guys know the story. It's hot there in the hall. They've had the windows and doors boarded up the whole time. They're wearing hot, stuffy clothing. I can't even.
They're kind of sick of each other at this point.
Yeah.
A lot of fighting.
A lot of fighting. They're frustrated. They're away from their families for a long time. And Colonel George Mason stands up to address the men that are there. 2 days before that, they're done. I mean, they're writing out the final draft. So remember, everything's handwritten. And he stands up and he says, we have a terrible problem with the document. We gave the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we didn't give the same power to the people acting through the states. And he asked a question which I think resonates to us across history like the sound of a clear bell, maybe even the Liberty Bell. And he says, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny?
No, wait, he's sophisticated. He's from California. So those are
Hey, don't tell people
those are
that.
big,
They're
fancy,
going to judge me.
fancy words. I'm a country boy from Dripping Springs, Texas, okay? What Colonel Mason said in my language is, has there ever been a tyrant in history that stole power from the people and then said, oops, I'm sorry, let me give that back to you? Nope, never in history has that ever happened. We need to be able to take the power back from the tyrant. Sorry, Mr. California, go ahead. He's a Texan now, though. We forgive him for the California part.
Only partially forgive me. So he makes this suggestion, and we don't know exactly what happened because we don't have video or audio of that convention. We do have Madison's notes, and Madison's notes are amazing. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, you learn so much. Madison was this savant. He wrote those notes, by the way, in multiple languages and his own shorthand, like his little pigeon shorthand writing, and in Latin. And Madison would write in whatever words were the fastest. That's how he decided. So the notes are kind of interesting when you try to read them. At that point in the convention, Madison writes nin com, which is a Latin abbreviation for no comment. So he says this thing.
It's a mic drop.
It's a mic drop. This thing is said, and these guys argued about everything. If you studied the convention at all, Franklin says 3 times it almost came apart. They argued about how to argue. They argued about whether they should pray, how they should pray, who should pray. And here they have this massive thing introduced by Colonel George Mason, and nobody says anything. I think they all just went, oh, of course we have to give the states the power to do this. And we kind of know that they did that, and I do think they probably laughed. And we know that because then it gets introduced to give the states this power, and it's unanimously adopted. The only thing I'm aware of in the United States Constitution where there's no debate and it's unanimously adopted. So then we have this power. So what do we?
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, just a simple way of recognizing the difference between what was already there, they'd already talked about, which is an amendment process that would begin in Congress, which is how the Bill of Rights happened. Congress proposes it, sends it to the states, and then the states ratify. What Mason was saying, what if Congress never proposes an amendment to put themselves back in the box, which they'll never do if they expand their own power? We need to be able to propose and ratify. We do all of it at the state level. That's essentially what he added September 15th.
So this is kind of an amazing thing that I don't think you'll generally learn in government class. Not a slam on your teachers in any way. It's kind of a wild way to look at the federal government. I talk to state legislators about this all the time, and I'll say to a state legislator, hey, when you came in and you had your orientation, your legislative orientation, they probably taught you like where the legislative drafters were, how the committees work, where the cafeteria is, where the bathroom is. Did they tell you that you're the most powerful person in the federal government? I've never had a legislature say, oh yeah, absolutely, they told me that. I want you to think about this. The only people in our entire system of governance that have the power to propose or to call a convention, propose an amendment, and ratify an amendment, thereby changing our system of government, the only people in our federal government that have that power are state legislators.
State legislators, not federal congressmen, state legislators.
It's absolutely incredible. You gotta ask yourself, well, why? Like, why would they give that power to state legislators? And they said Congress can't do that alone. They gave it to the states. Why? Because they understood that the best government was government closest to the people. You have state legislators in the room tonight. That's not gonna happen very often. We're gonna have a congressman or a federal senator in the room with you that you can actually talk to. I promise you, if you go over to the Capitol, you can get a sit down with your state legislator almost any day of the week. You can meet them in your town. And the framers understood this and they valued that. Also, just as a matter of fact, almost all of them had been state legislators or colonial legislators. So they were all familiar with that form of government and they trusted those people more than they trusted a government far away. So they gave that power to the states.
And they also had a healthy respect and value for the states themselves. In other words, they didn't want us to just be this homogenous, one nation, everything's the exact same in all the states. They respected the fact and believed very strongly in the states being different, that we could have different types of states, somewhat different values in those states, and therefore you could vote with your feet and move to a state that reflected your values more. That was important to them. And so having the final say on what the nation looks like and what our laws are going to be, the final say being the amendment process for the Constitution, they thought that should be left with the state legislators who owed an allegiance to their state, not to the federal government.
And they knew that we would need to do this. Mason discussed it. They even said about the Constitution after they drafted it, it was all done, they said, hey, we've done the best we can do. We expect that with the wisdom that comes from time and from actually using that Constitution, there will be people who can figure it out better than we figured it out. They understood human nature. They knew they weren't perfect. They knew they did the best that they could under the circumstances.
So Dr. Franklin, what should we do with this democracy that you gave us?
Do you guys know that story?
Not a democracy.
Thank you very much! What was this thing you gave us?
Republic of the
Thank you very much. A republic, if you
can keep it.
Can keep it. Thank you very much.
So this is a super important story from American history. Benjamin Franklin walks out of the convention. Mrs. Powell approaches him on the street and says, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he says, a republic if you can keep it. Last week I was in Austin, Texas, and I was interviewed by Benjamin Franklin.
How do you look?
Old.
Yeah.
It was for a podcast, and a guy's dressed up as Benjamin Franklin, playing Benjamin Franklin, and he asked me this question. He said, well, tell me about what's going on in the country right now that might surprise me, and tell me about how our system of governance is working all these years later. And so I could have been there for 2 days, so I shortened it and told him about all the horrible things going on, and he was completely appalled. I told him about things like the Department of Education, and you've got a federal government thousands of miles away telling local people how they have to educate their kids. He found that completely appalling. I told him about how the federal government tells us how much water can flush in a toilet, and he said, what's a toilet? I've explained that one, it was a little awkward. But I told him all the stuff that was going on, and he said, well, what are you doing about it? And I said, well, I mean, we're electing the best people we can. He goes, well, that doesn't sound like it's working very well for you. What else are you doing about it? And I said, well, not a lot, really, honestly.
We're doing no Kings rallies.
Yeah, that was before the No Kings rally, so we didn't talk about that one. He probably would like the idea of a No Kings rally. And anyway, he said, well, what about Article 5? I mean, Colonel Mason put this thing in that would allow you in the states to rise up and to overrule the federal government and to put it back in the box. It sounds like it's gotten badly out of the box we created. What about Article 5? Have you called a convention yet? How many conventions have you had? And I said, well, we haven't actually had any Article 5 conventions. And he was upset. He was actually visibly angry, and I know he was only playing a character, but he was playing it well, and he was not happy with me, looking at me as the representative of the country. And I was a little bit embarrassed, because I think it is embarrassing that we haven't had a convention of states yet. And he said, well, why haven't you? And I said, well, Dr. Franklin, there are some people in the legislatures, and I travel around trying to get them to do it, but some of them are scared. And he said, they're scared of holding a meeting that makes suggestions? Are you kidding me? Me and my friends, we picked up muskets. We went out on the field of battle. We fought the Redcoats, the greatest army in the history of the world. And you have people who are scared of going to a meeting? Now, this was obviously a mock interview, and so he didn't throw me out on my backside at that point. But I'm pretty sure if I was sitting down with Dr. Franklin right now, and it was the real Dr. Franklin, and I was sitting there drinking a pint of ale with him, and I had that same conversation, that he would have said to me, go away. Go away and come back when you've done the thing that we gave you the power to do, and let me know how it works out. Until then, I can't be bothered with you. That's what I think the real Benjamin Franklin would say to me. And so that's what we're doing, because I think we have an obligation to do this. We have a tool that the framers gave to us for this time. They told us this time would come. And they said, when it does, we're going to give you a tool. And the reason we're going to give you a tool is we don't want you to have a revolution. We watched our fellow countrymen bleed and die. We watched our farms get burned, our shops get looted, our churches get destroyed. We don't want you to have to go through that. We're going to give you a peaceful way to alter or abolish your form of government when it no longer suits the ends of liberty, and we expect you to use it. And so that's what Rick and I are doing. What we're trying to do is go around the country and tell people, you have the power to do this. Your legislature has the power to do this. It takes 2/3 of the states to call the convention. That's 34 states. So far, 19 states have done so. The purpose for this convention, and you have to state the purpose in the legislative application, is one, to impose term limits on the federal government. Anybody think we need term limits on the federal government? No. 85% of Americans
already have them.
think we need term limits.
We've already got them.
We actually don't have term limits on the federal government. We do have term limits on the president. The argument's going to be that we have voting. That's different than term limits. And we do have voting, and we have an obligation to vote out the bad people. I agree with that. But that's a different thing than term limits. Term limits is a technical, legal term. We don't have term limits on Washington, D.C. 85% of Americans believe we should have those. 85% of Americans have believed that for at least the last 30 years. Not just term limits on the elected officials, but we need term limits on the deep state, the staffers, the bureaucrats, the people who really control the machinery of government. I would argue all of that's unconstitutional anyway.
How about term limits on the guys that created this monster?
Term limits on the U.S. Supreme Court, term limits on the federal judiciary. So the vast majority of Americans support this, and we need this. We also need limits on the fiscal power of the federal government. The government is fiscally out of control. The debt is currently almost $38 trillion. If you count unfunded liabilities, that's probably somewhere between 150 and 170 trillion. I don't even know what that means. That number is so big. It's outrageous, it's offensive, and it's immoral. And we need to do something about that. We need something like a balanced budget amendment, right? You can't spend more than you bring in. That's not good enough. I think you need tax caps and spending caps. I think we need to impose generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government, just like everybody else has to do. And then the third one, which I think is the most important one that's in the application, is we need to limit the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government. What does that mean? Rick mentioned 17 enumerated powers in the original Constitution. We need to get back to something close to those 17 original enumerated powers.
In other words, we need to basically underline some of the clauses already in the Constitution and make sure it's very clear we're going to overrule this thing that's been expanded with the smaller version and get the government back to its size. Hey, by the way, you young people that have to leave, I get it. You got school tomorrow. PatriotAcademy.com. Check it out. Come spend a week with me at a state capitol somewhere in the country. I promise you it'll be fun. Okay, sorry, I had to do a commercial.
That's okay,
Yeah.
good.
Anyway, but this third one is the one I'm most excited about because we mentioned democracy versus republic earlier. By the way, if anybody tells you that you're a threat to democracy, your response should be, you're darn right. Because the founding fathers said democracy is mobocracy and one of the greatest of evils. We're not even just a republic. We're a constitutional republic. And this whole idea of the third thing in the call is to get us back to the constitutional definition of what the government should be doing. We write this stuff down in stone. We don't just elect people like in a republic and send them off to do the best that they can and make the best decisions they possibly can. We have a Constitution that says, go do the best you can within these boundaries. And so we need to redraw deep the line of those boundaries so that they can't get out of it like they've done with this Constitution.
So when 34 states agree, so far 19 states have done this already, 19 and a half if you count North Carolina. So when 34 states do it, the states will then gather in convention to debate those 3 subject matter areas. And if you can get 26 states to agree, then they will make a suggestion. And you're gonna hear a lot of people, our opponents will say, oh my God, a convention is so terrifying. They might do anything. You have no idea what they're gonna do.
Now, to be fair, I was one of those guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't support this 15 years ago, 16 years ago, because I was worried about what you were saying right there. I was worried, man, they'll get rid of my Second Amendment. I won't be able to protect my family, defend my family, or they'll change something about due process or something that I don't want to happen in the Constitution or that wasn't called for to be done in the Constitution. So I started off against the very thing that we're talking about tonight. So for all of you in the room, or any of you in the room, if there's anybody in the room that is not in support of this, I understand how you feel because I felt the exact same way. I was there. And then I started teaching the Constitution all over the state of Texas. And I started diving into every article and every amendment and digging deep into what the founders said and how it works. And this Article 5 thing tripped me up. I finally started realizing, wait a minute, this might be a solution, but again, I don't want to open Pandora's box. And then I had this guy on my show and he goes, Rick, what are you so worried about? He said, what's the worst thing that could happen? What is the worst amendment that could possibly happen? And I rattled off a couple and he's like, they're already doing that. Like the worst thing that you're afraid of that could happen, they're already doing that in Washington, D.C. And so then he's like, okay, and let's say that a bad amendment does get out of the convention. He said, how many states do you need to kill a bad amendment? I mean, let's just say they try to do something stupid like, I don't know, require, whatever, we call them not high capacity magazines, they're regular capacity magazines, where I come from. But let's say they tried something stupid like that, or they tried some other, Second Amendment.
Repeal the Second Amendment.
Yeah, repeal the Second Amendment or whatever. He goes, Rick, where do you live? You're in Texas? I said, yeah, I'm in Texas. He said, Rick, you could throw a rock from your house to 13 states that could kill this amendment. All you need is 13 states to say no. And that amendment, he said, Rick, there's already, at the time there was like 15 states that had constitutional carry. Now there's what, 29?
29.
Yeah, 29 state legislatures have said you don't even have to have a permit or anything. You can carry your weapon because the Constitution is your permit. Those states are not ever going to ratify an amendment that gets rid of the Second Amendment. And so it finally dawned on me, and in fact he explained it better. He said it's not just a state that says no, if one chamber says no. So if the House in Wyoming says no, that amendment is not ratified by Wyoming. If the Senate says no, that amendment is not. So you just need one chamber in 13 states to kill a bad amendment.
And you know how they say no? This is really interesting.
Just don't even take it up.
They don't even have to vote.
Yeah.
Like it never even makes it into, they do nothing. And by the way, with all due respect to my friends who are legislators here in this room, legislators are really good at doing nothing. Not to you guys. But literally when something's somewhat controversial, it's easier for a legislature to just be like, we're not even gonna look at that. We're not gonna put that in committee. This happens all the time, by the way. There are thousands and thousands of things that people want to do in the legislature every year. Most of them never even get a hearing. Many of them never even get drafted into bills. So,
which also means this will be very hard to do.
Very hard to do. I want to give you just some quick numbers on the idea of the repeal of the Second Amendment. This is the one I hear the most often. Mark, they're going to repeal the Second Amendment. 29 states have constitutional carry. By the way, I think it should be 50 states with constitutional carry. But 29 have it right now. It's increasing every year. 24 states allow you to carry your handgun into the state capitol. I can say I've done it, I think, in all 24 states. Hopefully not anymore, and if so, I'm not admitting that right now. But 24 states let you bring your handgun into the state capitol. 14 states allow you to take your AR, chamber around, sling it across your back, walk into the state capitol, and sit in the gallery. I am not suggesting that, just to be clear, full caveat here. But you can do that. And if it only takes 13 states to stop the repeal of the Second Amendment, you really think states where you can bring a loaded AR into the Capitol are going to repeal the Second Amendment? It's just ridiculous. So when people say this, it's just disingenuous. It's not possible, it's not plausible, it's definitely
It also comes from a defeatist mindset. It's almost like, why have elections? Why go vote? Why still have legislatures? Like if we're not going to use the constitutional tools to govern ourselves, then we might as well not use any of self-government. It is literally coming from a defeatist mindset. And I was there, like I said, but I'm telling you, and I now teach this in the Constitution all over the country, everything Donald Trump is doing right now that you like is temporary. It can be gone like that.
Anybody lived through the last 4 years?
Yeah. So the only way to make it, and it's not permanent, but at least buys you like 50 years. I mean, if you put an amendment, maybe even 100.
I'd say
Because some people will say, well, Rick, if you do an amendment to the Constitution, if they're not following the Constitution, why would they follow your amendment? They do follow the amendments. Name me an amendment from the last 100 years that is not being followed. When you do an amendment to the Constitution, the whole nation is watching. Everybody's paying attention. Everybody's very clear on what that amendment is supposed to do. Now, we're not very clear today on what the 14th Amendment actually did, because we weren't alive back then, we weren't listening to the debates, we weren't reading the paper, we would be watching on social media, it'd be the best civics lesson in American history. While the convention is taking place, everybody's going to be covering it. So, if an amendment gets passed and goes into the Constitution that helps put the federal government back in its box, the court is going to try to start expanding at some point, but it'll take 50 to 100 years to do that. They will follow an amendment. Anybody in here, you 18, 19, 20-year-olds, you get to vote right now? Then the 26th Amendment is being followed. Okay? Is the president still limited to 2 terms? 22nd Amendment is still being followed. All of the amendments that have been passed in the last 100 years are being followed because they haven't had time to distort it, one little word here, one little word there. Now, yeah, I would say there's definitely some of the Bill of Rights, some of the amendments in the original Bill of Rights that aren't being followed right now. J6ers certainly didn't get their due process. We certainly didn't follow the 4th and 5th and 6th Amendments in those situations, and sometimes that happens to us in our local communities. But it will be followed for a certain amount of time, and that's why it's so important for us to do it. We have to overrule the Constitution with an amendment to the Constitution, and the country will follow that.
And I just want to be clear, there's no other way to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, there's literally no other way to do this. Some people would say, well, let's just use the courts, and you can appeal these cases. We saw the overturning of Roe versus Wade recently, incredible, important. 50 years to do that, by the way, 50 years to do that. So if we think we have all these problems, we don't have 50 years each time to solve every single one of these problems. Also, if you understand how the court system works, you gotta have the perfect plaintiff. You gotta have the perfect judge in the case. You gotta have the perfect appellate court as you go up through the system. You gotta get to the Supreme Court with the right members of the bench, and then thank God we can always trust Justice Roberts. Yeah, no. And so
If you can cobble together 5 votes, like we've had some pretty good court victories, but every time we've had to cobble together 5 or 6 votes. You can always count on Thomas and Alito, and that's the 2 greats on the court right now. And then Kavanaugh and Barrett and Gorsuch.
Sometimes,
60, 70% of the time. And then Roberts once in a while,
Right.
But the other 3, forget it.
So that's not a solution. Now, some people are gonna say, oh, we should nullify. Nullification is something you're gonna hear pretty regularly in opposition to what we're doing. Nullification means a state just says, hey, that's unconstitutional, so we're not gonna do that. Here's the problem with nullification. Didn't we have a war about that?
We did, and it's never worked, never been done, and lasted.
700,000 people in this country were killed or maimed during that Civil War.
And just philosophically think about it, folks. If you can nullify a federal law that you don't like because you say it's unconstitutional as one state, which believe me, in Texas, we're pretty pompous, okay? I mean, we've got our opinions about what's constitutional, what's not constitutional. But if we can say no to something we think is bad, California can say no to something they think is bad, there's no federal law at all. Everything would get nullified by some states. We are meant to come together as a nation and with a vast majority nullify the federal law together. And for those of you that have studied nullification at all, that's actually what Jefferson and Madison said. You've got to bring the other states along with you. Single state nullification only works for as long as you're appealing that law through the court system or with an amendment. And so it's just not a solution, and frankly would lead to anarchy. Now, for those of you that want us to, go into total chaos or break up into 50 countries or whatever, that's probably the best route for you to do that. I frankly don't want to do that because I know that some of you in this room fought for my freedom. So I want Wyoming to be free. I want Texas to be free. I'm even willing to fight for them crazy Californians. And I'm still pointing at you for California. Yeah, because an awful lot of people in California have fought for me, right? And there's a lot of veterans from California that died for me. So I'm in this for the whole country, and we cannot survive the international politics right now. China will pick us apart if we break into 50 countries. So don't, if that's your plan, we're not going to see eye to eye.
Look, I have people who say to me, literally walk up to me after an event, and they're like, you know what, Mark, I think we're too far gone, and what we really need is a good Civil War. How many veterans in here? Raise your hand if you're a veteran. Keep your hand up if you're a combat veteran. Any combat veterans think we need a good Civil War? Usually what a combat veteran will say to me if they come up after the meeting is, well, I can't say the words that they'll say, because they're usually foul. And they'll say, you have no idea. Anybody who says we need a good revolution has never seen combat. You wanna see what combat looks like in a civilized country right now? You can see it. Go look at what's going on in Ukraine right now. Go look at the videos. You can see some pretty horrible videos online. You see fully bombed out apartment buildings, you see bodies in the streets, you see people starving, people displaced, farmland destroyed, power systems destroyed. The country shuts down if there's a civil war. That's insane. Anybody who suggests that is suggesting something insane.
We don't want civil war, we want civil discourse. And a convention of states is the ultimate civil discourse for the country. It brings together leaders from all 50 states to discuss what's going on in the nation and look for solutions. We talked about a lot of bad and ugly tonight. I want to give a little bit of good, then we'll open it up to questions. But this shift that's happening right now and people being more interested and being hungry, especially with your generation, the young people that are here tonight, it is exactly what's needed to revive the principles, to revive the timeless principles of liberty. I get the blessing of working with young people all over the country. We do youth leadership all throughout the year, so I'm more optimistic than most people because I know there are a lot of patriots in this generation, and there are people that understand I'm willing to do what's best for the country, not just what's best for me, and they want to serve. They're hungry. There is a revival happening in this nation, but we have to seize the moment. The wind is at our back for the first time in my lifetime. We have a chance right now, but I would say it's a window of opportunity that's cracked open, and we need to shove it open and dive through. This is our chance, and we don't know how long that momentum is going to be going in the right direction. This is our chance to revive the principles of liberty, cement them back into the Constitution, and save liberty for future generations. So be encouraged, despite all the bad that's happening out there, and be what Ronald Reagan said, a happy warrior out to take back a country and a world to freedom. That's how we turn this thing around.
One last thing I want to say before we open into questions is none of us can know everything there is to know about anything, right? We're very small and the world is very big. And one of the things we do as human beings is we try to make intellectual shortcuts. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, you can't know everything about everything. So one of the things I always look at when I'm looking at political stuff, whether it's somebody running for office or it's a particular proposal or particular policy, is I want to know who supports that policy, who opposes that policy. That's important to me because I'm going to look on which side are the guys and gals that I'm normally allied with, and on which side are the people that I normally completely disagree with. And in Convention of States, it couldn't be more stark. 6 years ago, almost to the day, on Good Friday, the left, in unison, led by Common Cause, which is George Soros' main policy organization, issued a press release attacking Convention of States. They had over 250 groups now that have signed on to this press release. I'm just going to say it like it is. It's every baby-killing, America-hating, communist-loving organization in the United States of America. That's a broad statement. Everyone, Mark? Yeah, everyone. You can't think of one that you know. Unbelievably, the Sierra Club is on there against us. Planned Parenthood is on there against us. La Raza is on there against us. MoveOn.org is on there against us. Hillary Clinton personally spoke out against us.
You mean you're not normally on the side with Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, if I wake up any morning and I'm on the side of Hillary Clinton, I'm having a nightmare.
I'm calling you.
I'm not awake. And so, that's one thing I look at. Like, if all those people are opposed to us, then I should probably be in favor.
But wait, who's with us?
Yeah, when you look at who's with us, it's who's who of the Trump administration. Like, you have J.D. Vance is somebody who supports us. You have Marco Rubio supports us. Pete Hegseth is a supporter. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, is a supporter. Mike Huckabee, ambassador to Israel, is a supporter. Brooke Rollins, our ag secretary from Texas, is a supporter.
Charlie Kirk was a supporter.
It's hard for me to talk about Charlie, to be honest with you. I was supposed to be hunting with Charlie in 2 weeks. We'll have an empty spot at the table for Charlie.
And for those of you who have not been through our biblical citizenship class, Charlie's one of the teachers in that. You should take it.
So these are the people that are for Convention of States. Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, all these major people in American politics.
A lot of people that were like me on the other side until they studied. Mark Levin wrote his book actually against it, started writing his book against it, and when he did all the study, he ended up flipping and becoming a champion for it. I started against it, studied it, became for it. David Barton, Tim Barton, all these conservative constitutional scholars started on the wrong side, honestly, and the more we studied, we came to the right side.
Literally every single well-known, published, peer-reviewed constitutional scholar on the right in the United States of America is in favor of this. Oftentimes our opponents, some of them on the right, good-hearted folks with good intentions,
Who love the
who love
country?
the Constitution, love the country.
Want the same outcome we're talking about, just not.
They will quote, for example, Chief Justice Warren Burger, who was opposed to this. Chief Justice Warren Burger. He was the Chief Justice who signed Roe versus Wade. He was a leftist, activist, anti-American Chief Justice, and that's who they quote in favor of their positions against Convention of States. I tell you that because it's just important. You can't always know everything about every issue. If you came to me with a little black box and you said, Mark, in this box is an issue. I'm not going to tell you what the issue is, but I'm going to tell you on this side of the issue, on the left, of course, are all these leftist groups that you are always opposed to. And on this side of the issue are all the folks on your side, the folks on the right, the Christians that you fellowship with are all on this side of the issue. I'm not going to tell you what's in the box, which side of the issue you're on. I would say I'm on that side of the issue. And if I found myself, for some strange reason, on this side of the issue, and somebody said, well, Mark, that's weird you're on this side of the issue because it's all the left on that side of the issue, then I would say to myself, maybe you need to rethink your position.
Yeah, at least pause,
Right.
and rethink it, study it, you know. This will shock most of you in the room, but you know what? I was wrong once.
I know, Kara told me
It was
about
back
that.
in the 80s. But look, we're all wrong. We all miss it. We all get bad information or don't think something totally through. I actually teach at Patriot Academy, all the young people, because we're teaching them to be ready to answer, to be able to do civil discourse, all those things. You always go into a discussion like this saying, if I'm wrong, I want to know.
For sure.
I want to be corrected. I want you to sharpen me. I want you to help make me better by helping me figure out if I've missed something. And the same way I'm curious. You gotta always be curious about the other person. How did they come to the conclusion that they did? Why do you believe what you believe? I really want to know how you got there. If you do that, you can actually have a good discussion with people. But if you go into something like this saying, I'm right, and there's no way I could possibly be wrong, and nobody else knows what I know, you can't have a good civil discourse. So let's all be humble enough to say, you know what, I could be wrong. And if I am, I don't have any problem saying, you know what, I got that wrong. I'm going to switch my position. I was telling a story last night. Where were we last night? Laurel? Yeah. In Montana. And I was telling a story about a couple of pastors in the Revolution named Muhlenberg. One of them's John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg. He's the guy, if you go to the Capitol, his statue's right there in the crypt next to Caesar Rodney and a bunch of the other guys. And he had preached this sermon where he literally, in the middle of his sermon, he had preached on Ecclesiastes 3, when time of this, time of peace, time for this, time for that. And he said, you know, there's time of peace, there's a time of war. And he said, it's no longer a time of peace, it's a time of war. He rips off his clerical robe. He's wearing the full uniform of an officer in the Revolutionary Army. And he calls his men to arms. And so they beat the drums, and he gets 300 guys from it. He had 2 different churches, got them marched off to war, becomes the 8th Virginia Regiment. He goes on to be a major general. His brother's a pastor up in New York. Now, he's down in Virginia. Brother's a pastor up in New York, writes him and says, you shouldn't be doing this. You're a pastor. You're not supposed to get involved in that stuff. Kind of what we hear sometimes today. Oh, the church is not supposed to be involved in politics, which, by the way, politics is nothing more than how do you treat your neighbor. I think there's something written down somewhere about you should treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated. Maybe that's somewhere in the Bible. Anyway, the point is, Frederick is telling John Peter, don't get involved. John Peter writes him back and says, yeah, I'm a pastor, but my liberty is as dear to me as it is to any man. Shall I then sit still? Heaven forbid it. It's my duty to go do this. So he marches, keeps going off to war. Frederick writes him one time in this argument back and forth. He says, you know what the problem is? It's you Virginians. It's Jefferson and Patrick Henry, all those rabble-rousers you got down there. We don't have any problems in New York. Well, about 2 months later, the British march into his hometown, kick him out of his church, and desecrate his church. And he says, maybe baby brother was right about this whole thing. Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg, the one that said don't get involved, the one that said I'm on this side over here, and you're wrong for being on that side, he gets so involved on this side, when you look at that Bill of Rights we were just talking about, the 12 amendments sent back to the states to be ratified, 2 signatures at the bottom. John Adams, president of the Senate at the time, because he was vice president, and the very first Speaker of the House under the Constitution, not John Peter, Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. John Peter was in that Congress, by the way, 2 pastors in Congress. But Frederick was willing not only to say, you know what, I got that wrong, he was willing to get involved to be one of the champions. So maybe there's somebody here tonight, you came here not so sure about what we're talking about, maybe even vehemently opposed. I bet you're going to become one of our best champions before it's all over.
All right, we're going to take some questions. And Julie, I see some cards up here. Do we have more cards or?
That's it for now.
Okay, if anybody, yep, I see people who have cards, so if you guys can go around and collect them. So we're going to have a policy, which is we do our best to go through all the cards. We don't censor any of the cards. We're happy to take any questions. We don't really care what the questions are. If there's foul language, then we won't read the foul language.
First one is, why is Rick so much better looking than you?
You have to ask his parents about it.
Yeah, it's a hereditary thing.
Yeah. Wait, so the second question is,
You guys are cute.
is it true y'all ran out of gas the last time you were here and it was Rick's fault?
And the third question is, who was driving when you ran out of gas?
I'm gonna go hide over here in the corner.
What
Mr.
steps do delegates from, what stops delegates from changing the rules and expanding the agenda once they're gathered?
So, if you think about how the delegates get their authority, first of all, we'll talk about that, is each state grants authority to their delegates by passing the resolution. So the resolution says, we're gonna give you X amount of authority, you can do A, B, and C, these 3 subject matter areas. It's exactly the same, by the way, this is what's called basic law of agency. It's exactly the same when you appoint an agent to do anything for you. A lot of you are business owners, you probably had a business insurance policy, you tell your agent, I need $1 million liability policy. Tell your agent, I give you authority to go out and get me and bind me to $1 million liability policy. What happens if your agent comes back to you and says, oh, Bill, you were so lucky. I found you a $5 million policy and it only cost you twice as much, so cut me the check right now. You go, no, I'm not bound to that policy. You're my agent. I didn't give you authority to bind me to a $5 million policy. I gave you authority to bind me to a $1 million. They are your agent and their authority is limited by the authority granted, and anything they do outside of that authority legally is null and void. It actually doesn't exist. It's like it didn't even happen. So the agency that's granted to the commissioners by their state legislatures as a limitation on their authority, even if they were to cast a vote that the state legislature didn't agree with, they don't have any authority to do that. So that's number one. Number two is the state legislatures continue control over their delegations the whole time the delegations are there. They are agents of their state legislatures.
And everybody's watching.
Hey, like you'll be watching.
What's happening.
You students will all be watching. I'll be watching. It'll be on C-SPAN 24/7. These guys won't be able to breathe or go to the bathroom.
Or cheat because there's no ballots involved.
It's all public voting, so they'll be watched the whole time. The state legislators will have a committee that's watching them 24/7. And if one of their committee members starts to do something that they didn't authorize, they will call the president of the convention and say, that person has their commission revoked. And we now have an alternative commissioner in the auditorium.
And there's a ton of precedent for this, even in the Continental Congress, where delegations from state legislatures literally went back to their state legislatures and said, can we change our orders? We want to do independence now. You told us not to do independence, now we want to do independence, or whatever the issue might be, and they did not disobey. They went back and asked. I'm just going to be blunt. I'm not. This one has never bothered me. I know there's a lot of effort going into legislatures having their rules passed first, and all these guidelines, and making sure you can hold the commissioners accountable. I understand the people that have issues with that. I am not afraid of that at all, because if 26 states propose an amendment at the convention and 38 states ratify it, it should be the law of the land in America. So this does not bother me one bit, but I get it. We're going to limit the call. It's actually the reason to get 34 calls that are the exact same anyway, and this convention will be limited. But you know what? To me, the whole thing's a wasted time of argument, because it doesn't matter. If you have that much of a majority in the country asking for whatever that change is, or that correction, or that chopping off the arms or wings of the federal government in that particular area, I think it should be ratified.
Yeah, I also think it belies human nature. I want you to think of yourself. Okay, and now your legislature has said to you that we trust you so much, we're going to send you to the most important political event in the history of the United States. And we're going to trust you to do exactly what we tell you to do. And we're all going to send people from our legislatures that those legislators who choose trust. And they're not picking just some random guy off the street.
And not because they're perfect people,
No.
or they're going to vote exactly like they want. They trust their judgment that they're going to do what's right for their state to try to pull power back to their state and away from the feds.
Now, imagine you're one of those people, and you go to convention, and you get a convention. What are the odds that you're going to go, you know what, this is going to be awesome. I don't care what they said. I'm just going to have fun and do whatever I want to do. And when I get home, they might throw me in jail and everybody will hate me, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like, it just doesn't make any logical sense. And Patrick Henry says, I have no light by which to guide myself, but to guide my feet other than the lamplight of history. He said that in his famous Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. So we gotta look at history. People will say there's never been an Article 5 convention in the history of the country. You have no idea what will happen. True, never been an Article 5 convention. There have been 41 interstate conventions in the history of the United States of America, including the Constitutional Convention in 1787. The exact number of runaway conventions where they exceeded their mandate and did stuff they weren't supposed to do over the entire history of the country, 41 conventions, the exact number, 0. They've never run one. You're saying 1 because you're going to say 1787 was a runaway convention. I like this conversation almost more than any other conversation because I revere the founders and the framers so much.
I'm happy how it turned out.
What's that?
I'm happy how it turned out.
No, but I understand. People will say 1787. I'm going to prove to you definitively that it was not. Definitively. It's not my opinion, okay? And there's a huge law review article on this, over 100 pages, over 90 footnotes. The definitive history has been written. It was written by Michael Ferris. It's published in the Harvard Review of Business and Law. It's called Unconstitutional. I can't remember what it's called exactly. Anyway, if you read it, what it shows you is they pulled all the commissions, which are the documents that give those people their authority, and they actually read them and went through every commission. And 7 of the commissioners, 7 of the delegations had a commission that read like this. That's the majority, by the way. And it said, the commissioner has any and all authority to do anything necessary to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the union. Anything necessary. It didn't say, and this is why some people, we think there was a runaway convention, it didn't say to amend the Articles of Confederation.
Which you couldn't do.
Which, by the way, yeah, under the Articles of Confederation,
No mechanism.
there was no mechanism. Congress had no way to propose a convention. The reason people think it was a runaway convention is because Congress did, after 7 delegations were already seated, Congress said, oh, you know what, we think you should gather, and we think you should amend the Articles of Confederation. They also added the secondary language, but they used the words amend the Articles of Confederation. And when they got there were a couple of delegations that didn't have the appropriate authority. They didn't vote. They literally didn't vote. So nobody did anything that they weren't chartered and authorized to do, and that's been proven by reading the commissions. Anybody who doubts that, I would encourage you to go read the commissions. You can find the links to them on our website. It's really interesting, and the reason I say that's such an important question to me is because I really do revere the founders. I think what they did was absolutely incredible. And I also want you to think about it just in the context of the times. Remember, George Washington was sitting as president of the convention, the indispensable man. He's sitting up there in that chair with that rising sun on the back of it, as Ben Franklin ultimately said. Can you imagine George Washington sitting there in that chair going, you know what? It doesn't really matter that we're not doing what we're supposed to do. I'm cool with everybody violating their oaths. I think that would be fine. Imagine Adams saying that, Madison saying that, all these guys that were in convention. In fact, honor was held in such high esteem at that time that if you did something dishonorable, if you accused somebody else of lying, you could kill that person in a duel. And the idea that the framers would have gathered in that hall and done something completely dishonorable that their home delegations didn't want them to do, it kind of doesn't fit with our impression of the framers at the time. By the way, also important to
I
note,
thought we were about to do the Hamilton musical there for a
we
second.
could do that, yeah, we know there was actually one of those. If you go back to the time, also then what happens is they send that document back to each state for ratification, right? So the states have to say, yes, they have to approve what happened. So even if you were to say, well, it was a runaway, well, then that was approved by all the states. That like, okay, well, we agree with everything you did, so we're actually granting you that authority.
Okay, I want everybody to know we are doing your question, but there's a lot of them that are almost the exact same. So I'm going to read it, but we kind of already answered a couple of these. So Article 5 doesn't specify any limits once the convention begins. What legal authority guarantees it won't become a runaway convention? So I think that was covered there. If a delegate violates their instructions, what real recourse do Wyoming citizens have? I think that was answered there.
Well, let me just add one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of the 19 states that have passed, 16 states have created something called delegate limitation acts, delegate selection and limitation acts. Limitation acts contain criminal penalties, civil penalties for people who don't follow their instructions. So states, I'm not worried about that like Rick, but states that are worried about that, and I understand people want that extra protection, they know that they have criminal and civil liability for people who don't follow their instructions.
A couple more that fit that same question. You made reference to Jeremiah 17:9. Why should we trust politicians who won't honor the Constitution we have to rewrite or amend it responsibly? Because of their self-interest. For the same reason that the founders set up a system of freedom that was based on checks and balances that would fall to the self-interest of each group. There is no one that you can trust 100% because of Jeremiah 17:9. So if based on the logic of the question, why should we have elections? Why should you send anybody to represent you in the legislature or Washington, D.C.? Why should you have a city council? I mean, I get your question. I understand where you're coming from. But for the same reason that you still believe in a constitutional republic and not want some sort of either chaos or dictatorship, if you're going to have representative government, and then you have to have some faith in the system, even if your faith isn't in that individual. My faith is not that the delegates or commissioners that you send to this constitutional convention will do, this convention of states will do everything right. My faith is that they will do whatever is best in their best interest, which is to bring power back to Wyoming, and that's what I'm wanting. They will want to strip power from the feds and give it to the states, frankly, regardless of what party that they're in. And so this is not about, we're not going to be able to get a life amendment, a marriage amendment, a lot of things I would love to get. It ain't going to happen. You're not going to get 38 states to ratify that. But you will get 38 states that agree on stripping power from the federal government and bringing it back. So it's not about sending saints, because we didn't have saints at the Constitutional Convention. We didn't have saints at the Continental Congress. We didn't have saints in Congress ever. There's no such thing. So that's why we have checks and balances. The fact is, right now, we're letting these yahoos in Washington, D.C. run away with our Constitution and not doing anything to put them in check. One more in that same vein: who would appoint Wyoming's delegates, and how do we ensure they're truly constitutional conservatives as opposed to political insiders? So everything I just said applies to that, but then from a practical perspective, they will be chosen by your state legislature. And for the most part, just like in most of those conventions in the past, it'll be state legislators that are going. There'll be some delegations that choose a constitutional scholar like Mike Ferris or somebody else, but most of them are going to actually send legislators. Same vein, given today's political climate, what safeguards exist against national lobbying groups? Oh no, I'm sorry, this one is different. National lobbying groups or activist organizations influencing the convention. It's, again, that's how elections work, that's how legislatures work. I'm not sure you could ever say that no one has a right of free speech to try to influence what's going on. I don't want to take away your right to be able to speak or influence. I'm not going to take away anybody else's right. So if somebody's for sale, they're for sale. If they're going to give up their, all of a sudden their self-interest and sell out, I'm not even sure what the scenario is where that would be, a negative. I've heard people say, well, George Soros is going to buy off all the delegates. Really? Does anybody really believe that your state legislators would go to a convention of states, the most incredible moment in history in 100 years, and be sold out to George Soros and not want to do what's right for the state of Wyoming? Okay, maybe he buys one or two, maybe Wyoming sends 10 delegates and he buys one. I can't even see that. If somebody's going and getting to be a part of this historic moment, I get you not having any faith in mankind at all, but I just don't buy it. You mentioned debt several times. Can you explain how debt is immoral? Well, first, it's because you're stealing from someone else. So when a generation like ours, those of us that are in my age group, runs up a $37 trillion debt, we have stolen from these young people right here. They didn't make the decision, we made the decision, and we can't pay our own bill. They're going to have to pay our bill. The founders are the ones that said that's immoral. You're literally stealing from the next generation. That's why they said if you have to go to war and you have to borrow money to fight a war, when that war is over, you cut everything you possibly can, you tighten the belt, you sacrifice to pay off that debt in your generation, because if you pass it to the next generation, you're stealing. That's actually why the General Welfare Clause and provide for the common defense and all that is tied together in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 1, because of that very thing. I think that says 21st Amendment on the Article 5. I'm not following that question. Whoever wrote that, could you explain that for me real quick? Wasn't the 21st Amendment on the Article 5? They might have left. Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that. The 21st Amendment was the one repealing the 18th Amendment, or most of it. It left the power to regulate alcohol, but not ban alcohol. And it wasn't done through Convention of States. It was done through an amendment in Congress proposed and then ratified by the states. The states always get the final say. It's just that it can start with Congress or with the states. Will every session be open to the public, or will parts of it be behind closed doors? Every bit of this is going to be open to the public. It's literally going to be a national, actually international civics lesson on the American Constitution. That's part of why I'm so excited, because I know people are going to be learning about recess appointments and executive orders and all these different pieces of the Constitution they've never paid attention to before. It's going to be phenomenal. Okay. Wouldn't our efforts be better spent enforcing the Constitution rather than risking rewriting it? That's a very good question. That was basically what I was struggling with 16 years ago. That was my dilemma right there, because part of it's what do we spend our time and our resources and our efforts on. If enforcing the Constitution sounds great, but that's what you're trying to enforce. As long as we're under the Constitution, which is what we're under right now, as long as we're under the interpretation of the Constitution by the United States Supreme Court, the only way to enforce the Constitution through the current system without actually using the constitutional solution that the founders gave us, the only way to enforce the Constitution without this is to convince the Supreme Court to do it, to somehow get 2/3 of Congress to do it. Neither of those is going to happen. So yes, the answer to your question is we should be enforcing the Constitution, and that's what a convention of states is all about, is enforcing the Constitution. It's the way the founders designed the enforcement of the Constitution. It is the check and balance on the out-of-control federal government. So I guess I'm saying I agree with you with your question, but we're actually doing exactly that, enforcing the Constitution.
All right, I'll take this one. How will delegates from each state be chosen, and how many people will be chosen? And the answer is, in true Federalist fashion, we don't know. Every state gets one vote, we know that, in every convention in American history, one state, one vote. There was actually one convention where they tried to change that. The big states thought, well, it'd be way better if we had more votes because we're the bigger states. And they took that vote, one state, one vote. And that motion to go to proportional representation was defeated. How do I know this for sure? Because the small states wouldn't participate and they would deprive the convention of a quorum. They just simply wouldn't allow that to happen. How many people will be chosen? Every state can choose as many delegates as they want. State might have 5 delegates, state might have 100 delegates. They're all gonna have to agree and cast a single vote. And I know in some states, we know from delegate selection acts, I'm just gonna give you one example. Some states have said 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, and the governor appoints 1. So for a delegation of 5, I have no idea how many there'll be. I think it's fantastic because we are a federalist system. And I think it's great that each state gets to decide for themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you think bipartisan consensus and loyalty to parties is going to play a role in calling a convention of states? It has up to this point played a role because, to be very blunt, Democrats have pretty much gotten what they wanted through the courts. This is a Democrat creation right here. So they've been able to get changes to American values and policy and jurisdictions, and like I was quoting from the Declaration earlier, the organizing of the powers, they've been able to get the courts to do that for them for the last 50 years. Now that's changing. It's kind of fun to watch them right now with a Trump presidency and a more conservative Supreme Court. All of a sudden we have liberals saying, I don't want the Supreme Court telling me what to do. And I'm like, welcome to the party. We've been saying that for 50 years. Glad that you could join our team. So up until now, Democrats, as Mark was pointing out earlier, have completely opposed this simply because they've gotten what they wanted by not allowing state legislatures to have a voice in our federal government. And Republicans are sort of split on it, which is why it's been hard to get at where we are right now. We're winning over more and more people to actually understand how this works, get more comfortable with the safety valves and all of those things. I do think eventually there'll be Democrats that get on board because of the fact that the court has become more conservative. And I don't want the court to tell California what to do. I don't want you to tell California what. I don't want. Let Californians be weird. Let Massachusetts be weird. And then everybody vote with their feet and go wherever they want to go.
Okay, this one says, thank you for coming. Can you please show us where any of the rules you claim will govern the Article 5 convention are written anywhere in any of our founding documents? They're not. And this is a really important point. I get this question all the time. People actually think this is a gotcha question. So that's one of the reasons I like this question so much. It's important to understand what our Constitution is. It doesn't contain all the rules for our country. There's a lot of stuff that we believe are fundamental in our country that are not specified in the United States Constitution.
Even how the Senate operates, it says they'll all adopt their own rules.
Right. Here's a really good one, Rick. Due process. Everybody agrees that due process is contained in the Constitution, right? And it actually defines every single thing that due process is, right, Rick?
Nope.
No. Like, how do we know all this stuff? How do we know what you could actually bring a lawsuit under the Constitution for violation of due process, but it doesn't lay out in the Constitution what due process is. A couple of things, but most of it's not in there. How do we know what due process is? Because every single person that was in that convention had the exact same idea of what due process is. And if you had said to them, well, Mr. Madison, you have to write down what due process is, he would look at you like, are you some kind of imbecile? Like, we all know what due process is, we're not writing that down. As far as a convention and the rules for a convention, virtually every man in the Constitutional Convention had been at an interstate convention in the previous 10 years. They were very common. They were doing them all the time. And so if you said, well, nobody knows how a convention works. They're like, dude, I saw you at the convention last year. Like, we've done these together over and over. We're not going to write all the rules for a convention. That's ridiculous. How do we know that's the case? Because we have the rules for virtually all of the 41 conventions that have taken place in American history, and they're virtually identical. They operated the same way in virtually every convention, starting at the conventions before the 1787 convention, the 10 before, and all those 6. And when we look at those, we know it's completely consistent. Now, people will tell you, by the way, that there are no laws around Article 5. The courts have never ruled on Article 5. It's really interesting. I don't know how you can say that, because there's actually a treatise, an entire legal treatise called The Law of Article 5, written by Rob Nadelson. It's an incredible book. It's a compendium of every court case that's ever dealt with Article 5. People who say that there are no cases and we have no idea obviously haven't read this book. Now, I highly recommend that everybody read this book. If you have insomnia, it's really great on your bedstand at night. It's a legal treatise, right? But there's an entire treatise on this, and what we know in that treatise, I can give you the overall theme, is what the courts say about that is you have to follow the rules as stated. You have to follow history and precedent as it exists. And mostly what the courts say is, we're not going to get involved because that's a constitutional matter and it's a political matter, what they call non-justiciable. Meaning the courts generally don't get involved in this stuff. But when they do get involved, they say follow the rules. One of the best examples of this is you have something called the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment was an amendment that was put forth by Congress, was not passed by the states. They were given 7 years to pass it. It was not passed in 7 years, and then Congress said, whoa, you didn't pass it in 7 years, we'll give you another 7 years. And that got litigated. It got litigated by the co-founder of my organization, probably one of the only people alive to litigate an Article 5 case. And what the court said, it never made it to the Supreme Court because it became moot. What the court said is, hey, you gotta follow the rules. It says 7 years, it means 7 years, you only get 7 years. So we know what the law is, we know what the rules are from history and precedent, and that's not something we have to worry about.
These last few in my hand are more issue-oriented and not convention of states, but we'd be glad to answer these as quick as we can, because I love this stuff. When are people going to start going to jail? I want to see Democrats in handcuffs. So I got to tell you, probably 2 months ago, a lot of people were getting antsy and saying, okay, enough time, Cash, enough time, Pam, all those folks. Why are people not being perp walked in handcuffs? I don't even know if Mark said this. I bet he probably did, just like I did, which is this stuff takes time. And they have been literally airdropped into enemy territory in these agencies. FBI, Department of Justice, all of that has been taken over by the left. And so we've airdropped a few good people in there to clean house. So, 10 months later, and I actually said this 2 months ago, I said, if they haven't indicted anybody by the end of the year, then I will join the chorus of saying this is taking too long. Now, thankfully, they've indicted Comey, they've indicted John Bolton, they've indicted Letitia James up in New York. So
I think they're on their way to indicting Brennan.
Yeah, Brennan, which is getting really close to Obama and that whole circle. They did all those things. So, I'm not promising anything, but those are good signs. I don't have a lot of faith in the swamp, even with, it's sort of like you were saying with Reagan. He came in with 3 goals, right? He wanted to cut taxes, restore patriotism, and cut spending. He got 2 of the 3, but the swamp was too strong. And so I'm not putting a lot of faith that they will do those things, which is another reason why I want to clip their wings and not have the feds doing a lot of the stuff they're doing anyway. But that would be my response.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to say, as a lawyer, you want them to dot all I's and cross all T's before they prosecute. Because what we don't want to do is prosecute and have them get off. They might get off anyway, by the way. Some of these are going to be in the DC circuit, and I just don't trust the DC juries. They're incredibly partisan. That's a really bad thing. They are, by the way, going to bring some of these cases outside of DC. The prosecutions, I believe there's going to be prosecutions about the Russia collusion hoax. There's a theory that they're going to use to do that. This is a little bit in the weeds, but I want to give you some hope. It's a 10-year conspiracy. So if you say it's a 10-year conspiracy because it started before Trump actually was president and it's run through his current term, then the statute of limitations hasn't run. And you can go anywhere that a significant act of that conspiracy took place. One of the significant acts in that conspiracy is the raiding of Mar-a-Lago, which took place in Florida, which gives Florida jurisdiction, which means you can bring the charges in Florida instead of Washington, D.C. And I happen to know a little bit of inside information that's going on, and so I just want you to be patient, because I think they're doing everything they possibly can. And the one thing I can say about this administration definitively, as a lawyer, This is the most well-lawyered administration in presidential history that I've ever seen.
It's really shocking. I mean,
Yeah.
they are solid.
And what I mean by that is, when they do something, they've already briefed the opposition to the lawsuits that will be filed against them. They know. They're like, we're gonna do this, they're gonna file a lawsuit that doesn't, I mean, and you see literally sometimes, the lawsuit gets filed and 20 minutes later, they file their opposition. Because they already knew what was gonna be the opposition. That is incredible. I've never seen that before in an administration. So from a legal perspective, I know a lot of the lawyers, Rick knows a lot of the lawyers. These guys are really good. And so I have faith that they are just taking the time, do the investigation, get the evidence, dot the I's, cross the T's. I'm prayerful that we're gonna see some people end up in jail.
That jurisdiction thing is huge. These DC judges are horrible. I went and testified for one of the J6 defendants, the praying grandma, and I'm telling you, it was such a stacked deck. I mean, it's a mess, and that hasn't gone away. Why can't elected legislatures represent COS instead of appointed additional layer of bureaucrat delegates? I think we kind of answered that because it's actually the legislature that will choose, and most of the time they are going to choose legislators to go represent.
All right, I got one here.
Okay.
It says, looking back at the nation's 250-year history, has the Constitution's amendment process described in Article 5 suffered to allow for the changes Jefferson referenced? You understand that one?
It suffered for the changes Jefferson referenced.
Whose question is that?
Suffice.
Yours?
Oh,
Yeah,
suffice.
suffice and put it
Oh, has it sufficed to allow for?
Kind of summarize what you're asking.
I think that was a teacher, but, so like,
Oh, it was somebody else. You just knew that it was suffice.
yeah.
Go ahead. Looking back at the nation's 250 years ago, the Constitution amendment process described in Article 5. Oh, I see what you're saying. You're talking about what I said earlier from the Declaration about how you don't change it for light and transient causes.
Like, is the amendment process working?
Yeah, it hasn't worked because we haven't used it, is my opinion. I think the 27 amendments we've got done through Congress first and then the states has worked, but for the big stuff to actually, when we disagree with the federal government, in other words, those amendments only happen because the federal government agreed with the states. They proposed it, the states ratified it. So the second part of Article 5 has not worked only because we haven't used it.
Yeah, I would say it's working, we're not working.
Yeah.
Like, that's really
Yeah.
the thing, and that's why, like I said, Franklin would be appalled. I think the framers would all have been appalled. Actually, there's some writings from the Federalist Papers where they say they expect that we will do this pretty regularly. And so I think they would be absolutely stunned that we haven't done this.
230, whatever.
Yeah, and it's not, like, maybe they would be flattered, oh, we set up such a perfect system, except for, obviously, it's not working very well at this point because we've changed it so much. So I just think we haven't done our part. They did their part in setting up the process. We have not utilized the process. Here, I've got one, before we go to that one. It says, what can we do to overcome opposition going forward, debating with the Birch Society? And so, look, I get this question all the time. To me, it's really funny at this time because I'm literally not exaggerating. I've been, like, people hit me on Facebook or they post like to me on X, how come you won't debate Robert Brown from the John Birch Society? Here's the blunt and simple answer. We can't debate everybody that asks us to debate. We debated the John Birch Society very early on in the beginning of the movement. There's videotape of it on our website. You can judge for yourselves. I probably get asked to debate 15 times a month, 20 times a month. I travel around the country doing stuff like this. We got important stuff to do. That's number one. That's why I don't do it. Number two is, and I think this is really important, if I want to talk to somebody about the Constitution, like, I'm going to talk to Mike Ferris, who's a scholar. I'm going to talk to Rob Nadelson, who's a published scholar. Mike Ferris, by the way, my co-founder, has taken 13 cases to the United States Supreme Court under his supervision. He's won 12 of them, including being co-counsel on overturning Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs decision. Like, if I want an expert on the Constitution, I'm going to talk to Mike Ferris. The John Birch Society wants me to debate a guy named Robert Brown. Robert Brown, I'm going to quote Robert Brown. So I don't want to malign him. I'm going to quote what he said in the South Dakota legislature, and you can watch the videotape yourself. He was testifying by video in the South Dakota legislature. He was asked by a legislator, Mr. Brown, tell us what your qualifications are. And he said, I don't have any qualifications other than I know how to read. Like, if I had to debate everybody that knows how to read, like, I don't have time to do anything else. And so I'm interested in traveling around the country, and I'm interested in helping to forward this movement. I'm not just going to debate every yahoo that wants to debate. In fact, we don't even debate anymore because we've answered every single question posited by the John Birch Society literally for 12 years. In fact, I'm being frank with you, I'm sick and tired of it. Like, you can go to our website, and we actually have an entire section. Here's what the John Birch Society says, and here's all of our answers to what the John Birch Society says. Like, we've done all this. So the idea that they want to have a debate, and I'll tell you something else. Have you ever watched a presidential race or a gubernatorial race? There's usually somebody in the race that are like ninth. They have, 1/8 of 1 percentage point. Like, I want to be on the debate stage. Well, of course you do, because you're losing. And you want the attention, and you want your shot at the people who are in the lead. We've already passed 19 states in the country. Like, we're winning. There's no reason for us to try to elevate the John Birch Society. So I get this constantly. It's a little bit frustrating. It's completely disingenuous. If you want to know what the John Birch Society says about convention states, I encourage you, go to their website and read it. They post all the time. Read their Facebook posts. They post all the time. I don't want you to not do that. And then go to our website and read all the answers to that stuff. So that's
And there would be no surprises. Like, they know exactly what we're going to say. We know exactly what they're going to say. So it just kind of gets tired and old. We like this better, where I'm sure some of these questions came from some John Birchers in the crowd, but we like to hear from everybody, not just from one particular group. So this gives everybody a chance. We created the platform, and provided the event, and we let everybody come. And nobody's been turned away at the door. Everybody gets to come and ask questions. Do the candidates, politicians, and foundations that take money from the pro-Israel, anti-American lobby, AIPAC, what justifications do you have for doing so? Well, first of all, I don't know that they're anti-American. I mean, just because somebody's lobbying for a particular other state doesn't mean they're anti-American. I'll just say this about the whole Israel thing. I don't support Israel just because the Bible tells me to. I support Israel because they're the only friend in the region. They're the only real friend. They're the only constitutional republic. They're the only free market economy. They're the only one with an intelligence agency that's even better than ours and shares and works with us. They are our friends, and if you can't tell the good guys from the bad guys after what happened on October 7th, then you are not paying attention. And so I just think this is an easy question. I understand not wanting to give anybody a blank check. I don't support Israel without question. I don't support Israel with a blank check. We're going to help them. As a politician in Congress should always say, I'm going to do America first. And an America first position is to help your allies around the world. I'm sick of giving money to Ukraine. I'm sick of giving money to a lot of people around the world. So I'm not for giving Israel everything that they want. And I think President Trump has done the same thing and been willing to say no to Bibi and to a lot of the things that Israel has wanted to do. Me personally, I'd have gone farther than President Trump did. I wanted them to completely wipe out Hamas. The only Palestinians that are ever going to get to live in freedom and actually enjoy a good life are the ones that get to live under an Israeli government. It's only those in that region that live under an Israeli government that get to participate in freedom. And that's Arabs, Jews, Christians, everybody. If they go back to living under the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, they will live in tyranny. Hamas is killing their own people. Hamas is murdering and raping people. I mean, how can anybody look at this situation and go to a college campus and be on the side of the people that are pro-Hamas? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And so I appreciate your question, but to say that supporting Israel is somehow anti-American, I don't get it.
Yeah, and I want to add, because I'm hearing this question more and more, and especially from young people, and I'm going to be honest with you, it terrifies me. And the reason it terrifies me is because, and I want to be really careful in the way I say this. I'm not saying this about whoever submitted the question, but it's anti-Semitic. And the reason I say it's anti-Semitic, it's actually racist. The reason I say that is because you're only asking that question about AIPAC. Like AIPAC, which is an organization that supports the American relationship with the state of Israel. It's, by the way, an American organization. It's only money from America that funds that organization.
Which, by the way, I didn't even know who they were until about a month ago.
Right,
So
and
I'm never taking money from them.
I'm not saying I'm a supporter of AIPAC. I'm just saying when you call it AIPAC, there's countries that give way more money, foreign money that actually comes from foreign countries to pay for lobbying in America to lobby the United States government on behalf of those governments. By the way, I'd be in favor of banning all of that. Like, I don't think foreign money should be able to come over here and pay for lobbyists to lobby our government. The lobby for a foreign country is their embassy. And the fact that they have lobbyists, that they can pay lobbyists to go into our Congress and lobby our, I don't believe in that at all. But Qatar spends way more money. China spends way more money. You know a question I never get? Why aren't you opposed to Chinese sending money to pay for lobbyists against our, I never, not one time in this recent history, never have gotten that question. Nobody has ever asked me the question about Qatar. And so you got to ask yourself, if the only thing that you're concerned about, and when you ask that question, that's clearly the only one you're concerned about, if it's only the Jews, if it's only Israel, you got to ask yourself why. Like, that's not rational, that's bigoted. And I'm against that completely. And again, I'm going to be just like Rick. Challenge Israel all you want. Say you don't believe in the policies Israel's doing. Say you don't believe in money going to Israel. I'm totally fine with that. I think that's a rational, reasonable debate for us to have. But when you only call out Israel and you don't call out the enemies, literal sworn enemies of the United States that are doing the same thing, radical Muslim countries, the Communist Chinese Party, you don't call them out, you got a problem.
And I've got students that ask me this a lot at Patriot Academy. I totally understand, because a lot of stuff you're watching online, and they're like, well, yeah, Rick, I support the children of Israel, because the Bible tells me to, but the state of Israel is a government that I don't have to support. And they do evil things. Yes, they do evil things. Just like the American government. Just like every government around the world. The real question is, at what point do you have the human right to respond to an attack? America killed millions of people after 2,900 of our own were killed at Pearl Harbor. America killed hundreds of thousands of people after 3,000 were killed on 9/11. We had every right to do that, and if I were the president in either of those situations, I would go back and do the exact same thing. Israel has every right to kill however many they have to kill to get the justice that they deserve for those who were murdered. And by the way, the 1,200 that were murdered on October 7th, viciously, barbarically murdered, comparatively to the United States, 1,200 out of just under 10 million would mean 40,000 American deaths in one day in America. That's what they're dealing with. It would be like here in America on attack where 40,000 Americans were raped and murdered and massacred. You don't think we would go wreak holy hell on whatever entity did that to us? Of course we would. And we would have every right to do so, as does Israel.
Okay, we're going to do a couple more and then close it out. Go back to convention of state stuff. You see, we take every question. We're not shy.
Anybody want to talk about transgenderism? Come on.
There's no such thing as transgenderism, Rick. Come on. Why trust the swamp in Cheyenne?
You mean men can't have babies?
I don't know. We'll talk about that later over a beer. Why trust the swamp in Cheyenne more than the swamp in Washington? I don't. I literally don't. I get this question all the time. I've been in 49 states, in the state capitals in most of them. The one thing I will tell you for sure, virtually all of them are better than Washington, D.C. California might be an exception. But they're all, look, they're just better. Here's the reason they're better. You know, if you go to Cheyenne to serve in office in Cheyenne, unless you're completely delusional, you're not going to get famous. The legislators that go to Cheyenne, you don't know most of their names. They're not getting famous. They don't have a huge Instagram following. They're not making millions of dollars in endorsements. They're going there. They're underpaid. They're overworked. They're underappreciated. You know, they get a lot of calls at their offices. They get a lot of emails. I'm gonna guess 95% of them are negative or abusive. Like, when your legislator does something you really like, when was the last time you wrote your legislator a letter about something you really like? There's one. Two.
Thank you for doing that.
We should do way more of that. Our organization trains our people when they do good things. Let them know they're doing good things and we love them and we appreciate them. Mostly they take abuse. And so they go there, they're not going to get famous, they're not going to get rich, they're going there, most of them, and frankly, even the ones I completely disagree with, they're going because they want to serve their state. They want to serve their community. They believe it's incumbent on them to do public service. I'm telling you, because I've spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., that is not true for most of the people in Washington, D.C. They go there, they like the high life, they eat in fancy restaurants, they get paid pretty darn well. For a lot of these guys, more money than they've ever made in their lives. Nowadays, they become Instagram famous or X famous. And those accounts, by the way, when they're getting millions and millions of hits on those accounts, they're getting paid for that, just so you know, because they're generating traffic and that pays advertising and they're getting paid for that. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does a bunch of stupid stuff and she gets a bunch of hits on her X account, she makes money for that.
Goes from being a bartender to how many tens of millions is she worth?
Yeah, she's worth multi-millions of dollars. And so they get famous, they get treated like royalty, and they make all this money. That's why I trust the people in Cheyenne more. Also, because they're in this room with you. I said this earlier, you're not gonna sit down with your congressman. For the vast majority of us, if we call our congressman's office and say, I wanna make an appointment with my congressman, they'll say, well, we can have a staff meeting with you. But you won't meet with your congressman. For the vast majority of this room, much more so, if you say, I wanna meet with my US Senator, good luck. You will meet with a junior staffer at best. So the fact that you have contact with your state legislators, and here's the last thing I'm gonna say, a little bit controversial, but it's a fact and it's an important fact, you can throw them out of office. You know how hard it is to throw a congressman out of office? You know how hard it is to throw a US Senator out of office? Senate race can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The average person can raise enough money to run for a House seat and to serve in Cheyenne, or raise enough money to help somebody remove an incumbent in Cheyenne. And that's the reason I like the state legislatures better.
Well, and I'll say the first thing you said, I don't trust either one. My friend Bob McEwen says it best. Don't trust any politician any further than you can throw them over your shoulder left-handed. It's not about trust. It's about what do I understand in terms of the system will cause the self-interest of all the parties involved to get the outcome that I most want. Because I want the power back in the states. And that state legislator is going to have the self-interest of wanting to pull it back to the states, whereas the federal legislator is going to want to keep it where they are.
I just wanted to add to what Mark said about the legislators, because I'm really embarrassed I didn't say this in the beginning, but we do have 3 legislators in the audience. In the back, we've got Senator Biden. Right here, we've got Senator Crago, if you put your hand up, and Representative Connolly there. And if you like Convention of States, and if you want to see Wyoming joining this effort, you can go and talk to them right now.
And thank you guys for being here.
God bless y'all.
I was thankful.
I thought you were saying thank y'all for being here.
All right, one more question. This is the last one. Somebody brought it up at the very end here. It says you take a very originalistic view stating that we should return to the principles of the founding fathers. However, you talk about amendments, and that's what this convention is for. Do you think that the Constitution should be a living document or be left as it is? So I want to, I think, correct the definition of what folks mean when they talk about a living document. When people talk about a living Constitution, what they mean is our interpretation of that document should change based on the times. That's what they mean by a living document.
This is the living document.
Right, like, well, it might have meant one thing when the framers said it, but times have changed, things are different now. I'll give you an example. One great example is the gay marriage decision, the Obergefell decision. The way that decision was crafted, if you read the decision, it's pretty bizarre, to be honest with you. Basically, the justice who wrote the decision basically said, love is love. I mean, those were his exact words. Love is love, and people should be able to love whoever they want. That may or may not be true, that's fine, he can believe that. That's not in this document. It doesn't say it anywhere. The framers, again, this is not my opinion, the framers probably would have driven somebody out of town for saying that I should be able to marry my male friend. That would have been completely foreign to them at the very best. And so my point is, a living document would say, well, we're going to interpret this one different than the framers did. We're not going to go to original intent. We're just going to interpret it how we want.
And how we feel that day, which is not stable for anybody, because Justice Kennedy, just 2 years before, had said no to gay marriage. So it literally depended on what he had for breakfast that morning. Apparently Cheerios 2 years ago and Fruit Loops that year, but it's I mean, wait, that might have come out a little wrong. Anyway,
that's going to be on the
that's going to be on the evening news. But the point is, the law of the land should not be based on what a Supreme Court justice has for breakfast. Right? It should be in stone right there in the document. That's why the amendment process is the proper way to make the document flow with the country. And what we're literally doing, everything that we're for and that we're pushing, does return us to the original intent of the Constitution. So people that say you're going to change the Constitution, it's very important to understand. We're going to restore the actual Constitution. We're going to change the interpretation of the Constitution. We're going to overrule the interpretation, which is this big old book right here. But we're actually restoring the Constitution, not changing it.
Yeah, so that's the difference between a living document and actually using the amending process. Again, the amending process was the original intent of the framers. And so we live according to original intent. People call it textualism, is another word for it. I use a little bit different word. I call it contextualism. And what I mean by that is We know what they meant because we understand the times in which they lived, the things that they talked about, what they were trying to address by reading what was going on in that period. In other words, we're reading the text of the Constitution in the context in which it was
That's
drafted.
what Jefferson said to do, right?
Right.
Go back to the convention, read what we were doing, get involved in the spirit manifested in the debates, is what he said.
Yeah, and then to close the answer to that question, then you and I'll just give some closing remarks real quick. It's really important that you look at that original intent, that we lean into that original intent. Otherwise, we don't have a foundation. Otherwise, we built a house on sand. We have to know what they meant at the time, and then if we want to change the Constitution, they gave us the power to do so. They didn't say, you always have to live on our intent. In fact, they told
And
us.
it's not holy writ.
Right.
This is not holy writ.
So-
Okay, I want to get rid of slavery. 13th Amendment's a good amendment.
So they told us the exact opposite. They said at some point, you might decide you need to change this based on the wisdom that you've garnered over the ages. We're going to give you the power to do that. They actually said, Washington actually said in his farewell address, that if you want to change the Constitution, make sure that you do it according to the methods prescribed and not by accretion. What he meant by that is not little by little, just because you interpret it differently, just because laws sort of infringe on the Constitution, make sure you call the convention and change it according to the methods that we've given you. So we understand what the framers intended by what they said. They were not unclear. This document, you guys who are in class studying this stuff right now can read it. It's really clear. It's not that complicated. The bizarre thing that I find about this gigantic constitution is this. They give us beautiful, small, concise document. It was written for the American people. It was not written for lawyers. It was not written for judges. It was not written for fancy people with high educations. It was written for everybody in the country at the time. The fact that we have this document means one of two things from the Supreme Court. Either these men were morons, and they wrote a document that's so impossible to understand, it's so obtuse, it's so ridiculous, it's so complicated, it's so confusing, that it actually takes a manual of 3,000 pages to explain this document to us. That's ridiculous. The other thing it could mean, and this is what I think it means, is that the Supreme Court believes that you and I are so stupid that this simple, beautiful, concise document requires 3,000 pages to explain it to us morons. That's insulting, and it's not true, and it's offensive, and it goes against everything it means to be American. And I'm going to close with one story, Rick, and I'll let you close this out.
Okay.
We are not a country of highly educated, pompous, arrogant, elite people. That's not how this country was built. When we study American history, and especially the period of the American Revolution, we have this tendency, it's a natural, normal tendency, and I appreciate it, I understand why we do it, but we study like the high and mighty figures of history. And if you think about who we study from the American Revolution, George Washington, the indispensable man. I can't even imagine being George Washington. Like, that's a one-of-a-kind guy.
We're both way too short for that.
That's for sure. And not good looking enough, and I still have all my teeth.
Yeah.
We studied Patrick Henry, perhaps the greatest orator of the American Revolution. We all know, give me liberty or give me death. In front of the House of Burgess, he was a young lawyer, it was an incredible, inspiring speech. We know that. We know Ben Franklin, probably the last guy to know everything there was to know. A scientist, multi-language guy who traveled all over the world when most people didn't travel more than 20 miles from their hometown. What a man, a true Renaissance man. Thomas Jefferson, unbelievably educated man. Not because he went to university, but educated by tutors in his home, self-taught, went all over the world, collected. Like, what a guy. I'm nothing like that guy. I'm nothing like Patrick Henry. Madison knew everything about every form of government ever instituted by mankind. Incredible, an encyclopedia of government. I'm not like that guy. Most of us are not like any of those guys. We're just regular people. If you look back in American history, my favorite story from the American Revolution is the story of Captain Levi Preston. You won't find it in a history book. You can look it up online after I tell you the story. It's a longer version of it. Captain Levi Preston was a captain in the Continental Army. He was there when that shot was fired and it was heard around the world. It's just incredible to me to think about the men that came out and how brave they were. Think about it in context, by the way. They went out to fight the Redcoats, the greatest fighting force ever assembled in human history. The most well-armed, the most well-fed, the most well-trained. the most motivated, the most educated, the most sophisticated in human history. It's like I say to you guys, hey, by the way, in the center of town today, a Marine brigade is coming in. You guys go get your pistols, let's fight them. It's crazy what they did. Why did they do that? Well, in 1843, a young historian by the name of Mellon Chamberlain was traveling around the country, and he wanted to collect those stories. He wanted to know, why did those guys actually go out and fight? I think it's incredible that they went out. I can't even imagine the bravery. What were they thinking when they did it? And he wanted to know, 1843 is a long time after the American Revolution, right? So you think about it, if you do the math, the age of those guys, if they were still alive in 1843, somewhere in their late 80s, early 90s. Now, a lot of us know people that old. They're still sharp. Some guys are still working the ranch when they're in their 80s. Back then, if you were in late 80s, early 90s, that's Methuselah old. You were that old and you lived in a small town somewhere in the United States of America, and somebody walked into town and said, is there anybody around who's this old? They'd be like, yeah, Captain Preston, who lives out on the other side. Everybody would know who you were. And so Chamberlain's going around because he knows he's going to lose his stories if he doesn't collect these stories and write them down. No video recorders, no audio recorders. He's going to have to go talk to these guys. And what he wants to know from these guys is, why did you fight? He wants to understand the causes of the American Revolution. And so he goes out and he meets Captain Preston and he asks him a series of questions. Captain Preston, when you went in to face them redcoats that day, what did you mean? Preston says, mean? What do you mean, what did I mean? And he goes, well, when you went out to fight them, why did you go to fight? Was it because of the Stamp Act? You're frustrated having to buy those stamps, put them on all your documents. It's just a hidden tax. It was taxation without representation. Preston says, stamps? Nah, Governor Bernard locked those in the armory. I'm sure none of us ever bought any of them. I don't know about you guys now. You gotta forgive me. I went to public school in Los Angeles. I thought it was the Stamp Act. I got something I was taught in school. He asked him the next question. He says, well, maybe it was a high tax on British tea. And you were just frustrated by it. It was unjust. It was unfair. You were tired of paying those high taxes. Captain Preston says, tea? Son, I was a farmer. We didn't drink tea. We drank coffee. The boys dumped it in the harbor, and that was that. It's not the Stamp Act. It's not the tea tax. I thought those were the things that caused the American Revolution. And then I think Mellon Chamberlain, being an educated guy, a school teacher, he knows a lot about the American Revolution. He understands what the revolutionary forefathers are reading, and he says, maybe you're reading the great revolutionary writers. Maybe you read Thomas Paine and Burke and Montesquieu. And Preston said, I never heard of those guys. Like, we read the Bible, Psalms, Almanac, but those men you speak of, I don't know those names. And I think at this point, Chamberlain's probably flabbergasted. He knows the causes of the American Revolution. He's been taught them. And here he is talking to an original Minuteman, a guy who picked up his musket and went on, the guy saying no. And so he says, well, I'm sure it was just the heavy hand of British tyranny. I'm sure you were just tired of the British boot on your neck. Preston says, tyranny? I never felt any tyranny. So I don't understand. What was it? What caused you to go out and fight the redcoats? Preston says, when we went out to fight them redcoats that day, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. Them redcoats, they intended that we should. That's it. In my opinion, that is the most succinct summation of the philosophy of the American Revolution ever stated. Better than any of these famous guys that we know that wrote the speeches, that rode in on the horses, that were in the legislatures. Captain Levi Preston was actually there, just was saying this: you're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do. I'm a free, self-governing man. That's your heritage. That belongs to you, every one of you. And it doesn't matter whether you're an immigrant to America who's just taken that citizenship test and sworn the oath, or your family's been here since the Mayflower. That's in your political DNA. And we ought to live up to that. We are self-governing Americans. And we are sick and tired of the federal government telling us what to do. I appreciate you guys having us tonight. I'll turn it over to Rick to close.
I'll keep it quick. You guys have been very brave to stay this long. Thank you, especially to the students that have school tomorrow, I guess. But just, exactly what Mark just said is really the summary of what we're doing here, to be able to self-govern. That's all we're saying. We want to be able to make most of the decisions in our life. Some of those we know local government's going to make and state government's going to make, and we know the federal government's going to make some of those decisions. But we want to shrink their list of decision-making and bring more of that back home. That's really what this is about. And so I would say exactly as Mark was saying about, we have this idea that only a George Washington can make a difference, or Patrick Henry. It's the Levi Prestons that make a difference. And even today, some young people in the room may be thinking, Charlie Kirk had an amazing platform. I want to make a difference, but I don't speak like he did, or I don't know how to debate like he did. I don't have a big organization and all of that. When Charlie Kirk was your age, he was exactly like you. He didn't know all that stuff that he talked about on those canvases, but he was hungry and he learned. Was he smart? Absolutely. Was he good at what he did? Absolutely. He worked his tail off to get that good. He became hungry and studied the right books, talked to the right people, got mentored by good people. You have a voice, just like Charlie did. Everybody in this room, whether you're 8 or 80, you've got a voice. Now I'll tell you, the leftists want to silence not only Charlie's voice, but your voice. And they thought they were silencing his voice, but in fact Charlie was just a vessel. It was the voice of truth. And you are a vessel that can also be that voice of truth. And I'm going to challenge you, whatever your platform, you may have 5 people that listen to you, you may have 5,000 people that listen to you. Start speaking truth. On social media, with your family, at your school, at your work, wherever you are. Even for those of you that came tonight that aren't with us on this issue, great. Go out there and discuss what you're for. Go out there and talk about why we're wrong. But use your voice. Every single one of us need to do this more. If we'll do that, if we'll answer that call, and we'll be willing to say, here am I, Lord, send me. Use me wherever you can. And I'm willing to do the hard work. You know, in Timothy it says, study to show thyself approved. So all of us need to study more. Go study the Constitution. Go study the Bible. Go study the great books that the Founding Fathers were studying in order to form this country. Study to show yourself approved. Be ready to answer. Be willing to have civil discourse. And then go speak with all boldness. Acts 4:29. Speak with all boldness. Be willing to stand up, whatever the cost. If we'll do that, we'll be able to save this country and we'll be able to pass it intact to the
And
next
be willing
generation.
to fight.
Ma'am?
And be willing to fight.
And be willing to fight. Fight, fight, fight. Amen. God bless you guys. Thank you, man. That's a good way to close it. Appreciate y'all coming. I can't believe y'all stayed for the whole thing. Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, patriotacademy.com. Go check it out. Okay. Now let's get extra credit. It is so beautiful. Pleasure meeting you.
It was very nice to meet you.
Should be a fun program.
Yes. Stay 5%. Can we stay
We still have you.
He does a webcast.
We love it. I love that back.
Pretty much every morning.
Thank y'all for staying. Sorry we went so long. Thank you guys for being here.
I don't know if I can approve that, but I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
I know, you know, I'm sure Bible study.
Oh, you're welcome. Amen.
Oh, very cool. Of course, yeah. It's not the funniest thing. Did you see last week when he No, he was really being bothersome. Yeah, so Doc was so just like Doc's reflecting like a lot of times they just want us to fight, and so Doc was really like up and about.
Get Bible study.
And so he's just wandering around there. And finally, I think Gene was like, hey, we see dogs walking around. This dog is out 6 o'clock. And he was, so I said, it's Doc. And he was over and I said, Doc would like to get his opinion on the situation. And it's like, that's for me as a choice. Like, some people, when they're on TV, they want to just be perfect. And my wife used to freak out. I love the kids, I love the dogs. Like, this is real life. This is exactly so I can be embarrassed about that. Yeah, but sometimes, like, we also have a witch around, like, this is happening on sometimes I'm just like I'm just trying to yeah, I try to have like, oh, heads on my desk. Keep it up. So I just look at it, like, really stop. But it's just I'm just apologizing to God.
I don't think so. I think they'll have somebody that can make it really bad.
Hey, pleasure meeting you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Hey, how are you?
Yeah, my son.
Hey, nice to see you. How are you? Good. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. This whole lot different. And I would say, would you because we don't screw
We have family here, so we came up and visited, but I've been district captain for Convention Estates for a while, so I don't, they're this close, so I'm not sure how much. I brought my dad along, so he was family, came along. You from here?
I figured he knows a lot better than me, and I'm gonna say.
Some of the weeks it's not. But if they fail, then the states have to track. It's just another level.
But you can still buy some. Yeah, and notice what happens with these guys. This is one of the reasons we do it.
That's why they got involved. They have things that say.
Maybe on that one right there.
That's a big deal.
It'll take a lot of work.
They're
Here you go.
So, you know, the guy, turn limits, right, that guy. I already know that. You know, what we're gonna do, because it's different now, you've seen it before. So a lot of times when it used to be, especially here.
Yeah, I know it's tough.
They don't like no good. You're on the other hand, like it's bad, it's embarrassing that you're doing this in front of everybody. And so
All those guys that run that, they do it.
Yeah, that's the right picture. That's the way you voted. And,
All right, guys, 5 o'clock, I'm getting out of here. Thank you. Oh, Nick, nice to meet you. You done good with this? Yeah. You see? You're blessed. You're
wait a second. I negotiated.
They can hold their own.
It's like Cody Johnson song, God bless his voice. It's different from your old road out there.
And I didn't realize that.
Rest is very all 4 of them.
And all of that.
We have 5 grandkids now. We're headed Yeah. Too far. The first time I went to Hawaii, I was like, I'm never doing that again. That's too far. Yeah, I don't like the beach.
It's so cool.
As far as you make all the stand over, go on the road. You know, like start business. You know, I have a manufacturer. I don't need to work.
Okay, good.
I bought them.
Okay, all the trades, that's my favorite. I tell you, I was happy to.
Yeah, so I get in there and they say, I'm like,
Still this fellow from you guys, because we got a 5 o'clock flight, and I want some sleep. Make sure.
so we had a,
So sorry.
you know, they said, I signed up for this program, so they didn't have to pay me state rate.
Hey, is that y'all's course that you?
Yeah, well, you were right.
If they come in and say,
Okay, that was perfect. I'm so glad you had that.
And
Yeah, I know y'all are gonna have
the
that.
fact that everyone's involved. All right, guys, we gotta run. We appreciate you guys. Hey, thanks for the conversation.
Oh, I forgot. You can keep talking. I forgot we're actually at the hotel.
You guys
This is
just
my
got
dad,
Absolutely. Yeah, we put gas in earlier. My assistant puts it in my phone all the time. Hey guys, I'm going to get it. We got a 5 minute.
Okay.
Appreciate you. Thank you guys. Thank you, my brother.
you wanna take Rick's leftovers?
No, no, no.
Oh, I was just curious for you, it's nice.
All right, well, I gotta get out of here. I gotta find anything. God bless you. We'll be in touch.
yes, absolutely. Safe travels, man.
Nice to meet you.
Do you need to do the chairs or they're gonna?
We don't have to do chairs,
Okay, I'll go up here and grab your stuff now.
Constitution, the mics are theirs, there's a
Okay.
pocket constitution. I think that's it, except there it's. Get out of here.
Daryl, did you record?
Julie tried, that's her phone, I don't know how hard it is now, she's having this phone. Yeah. Sure. You know, I don't know for sure, but I don't think they print them anymore. Because they got it from the government printing office. And we have somewhere. Yeah, you wanna put those in this box here? So one's got the 100 and one's got the 800. Okay, so those, there's that here. Those are the high-tech systems.
Oh, I don't want to mess up your high tech system. We're very, organized.
Put the bag over it and we put it somewhere. Or that's here. Do it all fast.
Oh, all right. Like I said, I don't want to screw up your system.
I might get a break with that problem.
And so, we really think that there's no better looking out there. From the side. So, if you ever hear any discussion about it, we're trying to start at least discussions.
I'm not sure, I can't remember how this goes.
No, this is better, I'll do that. You guys can send them up. I mean, it's one step up, but it's round on the end. Oh, so she has.
She has kind of a finish.
Yes.
Great. It was when everything was going on, she was
Probably
getting
not.
town halls and stuff.
But still, somebody hand me.
Emails and.
Please do.
And just so.
Well, this is, sorry. They started the sheriff. They also, oh, you did.
Already planning on.
Right.
guys in Sheridan?
No, we're in Portland.
Wow.
Yeah, my phone. Oh, yeah.
Here's your bag.
Correct?
And then you can just lay anywhere in that close.
Yeah, they all left.
It's only $4. It's not sugar. Yeah.
You look small.
You live small. I used to live there. Or not even,
Oh, right.
I did one of this just.
I must have her set something.
Right, like, leaf blower must have.
Okay.
Like, there's a bridge and there's-
So, not for this part.
Oh, yeah.
If that's our part. No, if I don't. These are combat vets and more stuff. Local level, community, those Thanksgiving, things for Christmas, New Year, for the community.
we haven't.
One of them we voted yes. We're trying to help the.
Cancel.
They just have to go for, younger veterans to get involved. Sign up.
We believe that we're considered.
Well, yeah, it was in-
You watch the country go down here? And you say, what in the world can I do? I got just having kids in it. I gotta go to work. And then they 7 kids on the first year.